shall I start with what my favorite adaptation is and my favorite dresses? Okay.
Give it to me.
So
Give it to me.
This is the one that I'll talk forever about. Everyone will be like, oh my God, here she goes again. So I don't know if you've seen this one, the 2009 Emma adaptation. All of her dresses, incredible.
Yes.
They put her in a lot of pink, which I kind of love. And I feel like people go for a lot of pink when it comes to Emma anyway. You see that with the Gwyneth Paltrow one as well. Particularly the pink one. This is what she wears at like the Box Hill scene, so it's quite dramatic. But obviously she's also in that moment, she's like really flirtatious and everything. So I love that they put her in this pink colour. But this dress in particular is that classic Empire dress, right? Which is like iconic for Regency. So it'd be really good to chat about that, because I read that started to come into fashion around the 1790s and then it just like progressed from there.
This is why I was really initially interested in fashion and politics intersecting, because it's like they're completely inseparable, especially in this time period. So you get in the late 1780s Marie Antoinette doing that like chemise à la reine, which is that beautiful kind of white, frothy. It looks very light, looks very summery, very pastoral, but it looked much more informal than, of course, what you're thinking of with like the big panniers and huge hair. She wanted something more natural. And eventually that, in tandem with the revolution that was brewing in Paris, and the ideas of, égalité, liberté, fraternité, and this return to kind of really basic Roman Republic ideals kind of culminated in women's fashion really leaning toward this like empire waist. Well, we call it empire for Napoleon and his empire. But this risen waist that kind of gives you the illusion of like a column. Like I'm kind of wearing one right now. This is like a modern version. I made it. But it does kind of make you look like the column, high up, like you're almost like a plinth. And then you kind of go down from there. And they're really, really drapey at first. And they have this really, really sensual quality. They're really quite sexy. I think Regency is underrated in terms of sexiness. It really is, y'all. And then eventually that goes from really the strict kind of neoclassical look to what we're seeing in Emma, which is more kind of like mid to, like, I would say like 1806-ish, going into the teens. Before it gets really, really structured. And this is like the classic kind of like Regency silhouette. So you get the really long, but kind of columnar skirt, and then pretty little puff sleeves, which developed, I would say, like after 1802-ish, really. Actually, after 1800, really. They were starting to appear because they were much more fitted before.
Oh
yeah.
I love this.
Oh my gosh.
No, this is fascinating. No, this is fascinating because I saw some kind of like actual Regency drawings of like dresses at the time. They kind of look like these little postcards, but when I looked at some of those, they did look like they had a very heavy Roman and Greek influence to them. Like you could see people with like a vase and it's like draped on them and everything. It looks slightly different than what you get in the adaptations, but I can see how it develops into this more structured dress, which you see, like you said, in Emma there with the pink ones. And what I love about it as well is obviously they play around with a lot of colour in these adaptations as well. And I feel like pink is really fitting for Emma.
It so is. I so agree with you. It's a frothy, very feminine. I mean, you know what? I'm bringing my own modern perception of that color to it, but so is the costume designer. That's what we're affiliating it with, so you get these absolutely beautiful little like sprigs of flowers, and the little ribbons as well are very detailed. If you actually can find some photos of those,
if you see with that kind of more yellowy toned flower dress, they often put this like dark blue, like a rich dark blue pinafore over the top.
The color palette there as well, like that pretty like pale yellow with some navy blues. It's very effortless. I just love Emma's costumes, really I do.
But I also love as well that they always put her in these kind of long sleeves as well, and I think that shows like obviously her father's paranoia that she's like gonna get sick. So like every time that she's out like walking, she's always in these like long, she's got like a long top underneath. Was that quite common that people would layer in this time period with like shirts and in long sleeve tops?
Absolutely. So there's this thing called a chemisette, which you can see in a lot of Austen adaptations, sometimes taken to an extreme, as we may talk about later. So like I would not wear this neckline during the day. I would probably be wearing something like this, but with this like kind of dicky underneath. So it's like a vest. It goes over your shoulder like that. And then it ties underneath with maybe some drawstring. And it has pretty little ruffles. You see them a lot in the Emma 2020. adaptation with these pretty little ruffles here, and that kind of just made it more appropriate for day wear. But also, it looks to us like very modern, like literally wearing, you know, a kind of t-shirt underneath like a shorter sleeved shirt. And that totally is accurate. You could have totally done that. So technically, she might have worn something slightly higher necked here with that under the chemise set. But it's still really cute. I really like it.
So usually if you're out every day, you would be a little bit more covered up, and it's only kind of at balls or evening wear that you would then be like a bit more exposed, which I think we do see with a lot of ball scenes. Like people tend to have more flesh on show. I think we even see that with like the 1995 Pride and Prejudice as well. Like they have a lot more flesh on show than they do like usually. Like they'll often seen wearing long sleeve dresses. Were gloves, is that accurate to the time period then? People wearing these like long gloves?
Oh yeah. I think it's so chic as well. People would have worn gloves a hell of a lot more than they do today. And actually I was at a ball with the amazing, shout out, Zach Pinsent. It was like really, really hot in the room. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, should I take off my gloves? And I asked him and he's like, well, I mean, you can, but even at the time, that's kind of like a bit dirty. You're relying. I mean, this is a time when hygiene isn't quite as ubiquitous as it is today. I mean, people still bathe. But like, you know, you're relying on everybody around you to also have kind of hygiene. So if you're sweaty and clammy and you take off your gloves and then you touch somebody else, you know, there's also an element of that in there. So you would keep them on for propriety first. 2 for the look, girl, and 3 slightly also for hygiene. You know, it's a dirtier world than it is today, so that's a very kind of interesting aspect. So you would have worn gloves all the time during the day, not at home so much, but like if you go out, you would have worn gloves. At balls, you would have worn gloves.
Yeah, well, that's actually such a great point. I think a lot of people often think that people were quite like reserved in like the way that they were like physically intimate with people. But actually, if you think about it, you're probably touching way more strangers back then than you do now, because you're dancing with different people constantly. You're constantly touching people.
Absolutely.
Whereas now, like, we're not always touching each other.
No. I mean, honestly, people are like touch starved now. They go to the Aesop store to get their hand touched, you know? Like, it's crazy out there. So.
And I have my nails done. It's just like physical.
I'm like, oh my gosh, this is intense. Yeah.
Brought up the other Emma adaptation. That was kind of like groundbreaking, right? Like, I know we have like Bridgerton and everything now, which obviously has really pushed Regency attire. Like, it seems to have just like blown up since then. But the Emma was a little bit more, I don't want to say risque, but it kind of was in the sense that things were a little bit more out there than they are in Bridgerton, right? Some of the outfit choices, I mean, even that, the dress that she wears to Miss Taylor's wedding, it's like that, you know, it almost looks more costumey, I think, than it has done in other adaptations.
That's interesting you say that, because this is widely considered to be one of the most accurate adaptations in terms of costuming. There are so many elements of this movie that are just like totally accurate to the point where they're copying dresses from, you know, the Victoria and Albert collection. Like, you have a costume institute. Is that pink gown? This is like a classic kind of, people in the historical costuming community, this is like our bread and butter, this dress. Everyone loves this dress. And then Emma 2020 came out, and they recreated the dress, and it was just such a lovely ode to the period, but also, again, they're showing how they really respected the era. Like, it was so much fun to watch as somebody who does actually really love detail and accuracy, and I totally get storytelling. Oh my god, I'm not a snob, okay? Like, I actually don't mind Bridgerton. I initially was like, what is this? But I actually love Bridgerton. But like, this dress is it's completely accurate. Like, they recreated it to a T, from the fabric to the beautiful little trimmings on the Empire bust line to the beautiful sleeves. I mean, it's so interesting to see in a modern film with, you know, a digital camera, something that actually really looked of the time. The hair is really accurate.
So she wears a lot of hats as well. Was that quite common? Because I feel like a lot of people are under the impression that obviously bonnets was like, that was like the number one thing that you'd wear. But I actually did read somewhere that hats in just like unusual headpieces were actually quite common.
Oh yeah. People loved things that look vaguely like turbans. People, of course, loved bonnets. People, of course, loved things that kind of look like a beret. And I'm forgetting the name for them right now, but they look a bit like a beret, and they're not called that. But to us, there's actually a wide variety of headwear, and even within bonnets, you get totally different shapes as well. So like, there's a poke bonnet, there's, you know, more of a sun bonnet, there's kind of a thing called a shako, which is more military inspired, which looks more like a military kind of hat. And it's just so fabulous to see so many different accessories finally being used, and also they're quite colorful. Complementary color in the bonnet as opposed to the dress. Like, the accessories on this movie are so good, so good. Oh.
So that would be interesting as well with accessories, just because we're on that topic. In the latest Persuasion, the Netflix adaptation, then, can I send you a photo of these hats and let me know? Because I was like, is this accurate? Some of their outfits, I don't know if they're accurate either. Because they look quite unusual.
And I said that people wore something like berets. They were called tams. I've remembered the word. Because I think that they were trying to reference, with Dakota Johnson's hat, something like this, but they did it really weirdly. And also just, I think the hair throws a lot of people off. Like,
and the lipstick. Regency, the lipstick throws me all the time.
Yeah, the makeup.
Like,
I mean, the
lipstick.
styling was really weird, I gotta say. I think the reason people didn't like Dakota's costuming is because it just looks 1910s. So later in the 1910s, or even in, mostly in the 1910s. I mean, you kind of started around like 1909. You get that, again, the Empire silhouette. But it's much more slim. It's much more like hugging the body. And also, this is like more Edwardian styling. It just really is. It's just super weird that they chose to do that.
The colouring as well, right, gives me more like Victorian Edwardian feel as opposed to, I mean, I can't say for sure, but when I'm looking at like photos of like Regency dresses, like those little postcardy ones, pastels seem very popular. So you see that in a lot of the adaptations as well. I think one that stands out to me is the Northanger Abbey version with Felicity Jones in. Have you seen that one?
Yes, I love that one.
And I love that they look their age in that one as well. Like, it's youthful, it's colourful, especially Isabella's costumes. Like, she looks like somebody who would be trouble and like a playful and flirty. And a good like reference there to like that military style that you were on about as well, because some of the coats, they do kind of look quite military.
Yeah, totally agree. It's interesting that you say that Isabella looks like she could have been more trouble, because this is kind of what I was talking about earlier with that transition from really neoclassical to slightly more just like generally Regency. If you look at that first image, Isabella has an item called an open robe on that is much more early Regency. So open robes were like 1795-ish to about 1800. People didn't really, I mean, everything's within reason. People still wore their clothes if they had them, but people would often update them as well. But, that's an earlier style, which, in my opinion, the earlier Regency is much more overtly sexual. It's much drapier. There's much more on display. She probably still would have worn some kind of chemisette, but if she's really going for that 1790s, very sexy neoclassical look, that's like much more accurate. And then you look at Felicity Jones next to her, and that's like way more mid to late Regency. You can see the difference. You can see how it's developed. It's gone from this very kind of drapey garment to something more structured. But in terms of color, there is a misconception that there was exclusively pastels in the Regency era. And I think people think the same about the Rococo as well. I think that's because of like Marie Antoinette 2006 with Kirsten Dunst, because she wanted a specific color palette for that film. And because they did a really good job with the costumes, a lot of people just think, oh, okay, they really only wore macaron colors, or with these adaptations, they really only wore, slightly more muted, slightly paler, more pastel. But the Regency was super colorful. Like, truly, I've seen some bonkers color combinations out there. But it kind of depended on region, etc. So I think a lot of these choices were probably made because, realistically, I don't really know if, somebody in the countryside would be wearing something bright orange all the time,
Interesting. So talking about that then, coming back to the 2020 Emma then, so some of those colour choices, very bright. The yellow coat stands out to me. Yes. Oh my gosh, so bright. So bright and colourful and looks so good. So how would people actually colour clothes back then?
That's where I have a weak spot. I don't know the actual scientific specifics, but they had like various dyes. This was still before the advent of aniline dyes, which were synthetic essentially. So like if you think of like if you can think of mid like 1850s 1860s, when it starts to get really brightly colored, Civil War era or Gone with the Wind, those have been really brightly colored dresses because they were synthetic dyes at that point, or at least more chemical dyes. they were still using natural dyes here. So, of course, to get really bright colors, you probably also had to spend a little more. But at the same time, um, muslin, which is this beautiful flowy white fabric that you see pretty much in every Jane Austen adaptation, was like the height of the day. And to get really fine, really sheer, really see-through muslin could be quite expensive because that was coming from India, you know. So the shipping charges, production charges, etc. But it's just a matter of quality, and it's the same with dye. So like you could probably find, you know, really bright yellow clothing for slightly cheaper, but would it be that good of quality? You know, question mark. But yeah, Emma totally. That's why a lot of people in the historical costuming community absolutely love this adaptation, because they show the full spectrum of the Regency, in terms of color, day, night, accessories, bonnets, like the whole thing. They really went there, and I love that for it.
It's interesting what you were saying about like muslin as well, because I read that actually in a practical sense muslin was better because it laundered better than like silks.
Oh, it does. Yeah, for sure.
The only issue that most people struggled with it, which actually a lot of people didn't wear white because of this, is because that was the most difficult to keep pristine. Like it was difficult to keep your white clothes white, so a lot of people didn't wear white. And apparently if you went out in society in white, that was like a status thing, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely it was. Absolutely it was. It became more popular during the Regency because, I think this is true, I'm pretty sure it's true, but there's a rumor that Napoleon loved to see Josephine in white, right? And they were like not just the leaders of French society, but also, you know, fashion really at the time. And so Napoleon loved to dress her in really empire waist gowns, but really lots of whites. He just thought it looked really fresh. And so that's why you get this kind of popularity of white in the era, in evening wear especially. But also it's just like kind of versatile. You can really style white much easier than you can, you know, a bright orange gown. So you can wear it to more balls, you can, et cetera, et cetera.